The resurrection of Jesus occurred at this time of year nearly 2 millennia ago. It was a literal bodily resurrection, and so it defied the laws of nature due to God's miraculous intervention, and that's why it was so shocking. In the normal way of things, people don't just come back from the dead, and the first century was not some miraculous or superstitious age in which people believed that things like that were expected to happen. It's an event that rocked the world of a lot of people and continues to do so even to this day. Matthew 28:1 has some of the female disciples making their way to the tomb of Jesus, intending to pay further respects. They had looked on as he was crucified, as he died in agony, as he bled out, and they had looked on as Joseph of Arimathea had taken the body down from the cross, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. It's now the third day since the burial and the first day of the week, and that is very significant since God started creating on the first day of the week, and then he created for 6 days straight before resting on the seventh. And so Jesus rested in his tomb on the seventh day, but his resurrection on the first day of the week signals what God has in store for creation at large. Jesus' resurrection is the very beginning of the renewal of all things. This event has rocked the world of many, and this event that has rocked the world of many began with the moving of a very large rock. The one that Joseph had placed in front of the tomb. It would have been rolled downhill in a groove, blocking the entrance to the tomb, and so it would have taken several strong people to remove it. But on the morning of this first day of the week, Verse 2 says, "There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it." Matthew continues that the angel's appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. And when the guards saw him, they became afraid, and like dead men, they fainted. And this had all happened before the women had made their way to the tomb where the angel met them. And he says to them, "Don't be afraid, for I know you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified." The angel acknowledged the literal crucifixion of Jesus. He literally died. He was literally buried. He literally shed his blood, and now his body is missing. In verse 6, the angel says, "He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay." I've said many times that the stone was rolled away, not so Jesus could get out of the tomb, but he was out long before the stone was moved. It wasn't moved so he could get out, but it was moved so the disciples could look in. These women who had witnessed the burial knew that his body had been there. Now they know that it is not, and they're invited to confirm that as eyewitnesses. The angel instructs them in verse 7 to tell his disciples he has risen from the dead, but to this day, some people still do not believe this. Even some who mislabel themselves Christians deny the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus. Oh, they like some of his teaching, but they think that to admit that he actually rose from the dead would make them science deniers. So they argue that Jesus was raised in the sense that he lives on in our hearts because we've kept him alive as we've continued to tell his story all these years. But that is right opposite of what the Gospels, including Matthew, report. For they emphatically report a literal death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And we believe the message by faith, and we believe in the evidence for an empty tomb. Some say the body was stolen to perpetuate a resurrection hoax. But what reason would the disciples have had to steal the body? That would have just got them in more trouble by the powers that be, who had the resources to track them down and recover the body should it still be anywhere to be found. But if Jesus had not been raised, the disciples could go back to their old way of life. They could recover from their false hopes, lick their wounds, and start over again, back up where they'd been. But Jesus being raised will change the whole trajectory of their lives. It will indeed rock their world. The women hurry off to tell the apostles the news. Verse 8 says that they were afraid, yet filled with joy. But didn't the angel tell these women, "Don't be afraid. So why is it that they were afraid? Well, I think any of us would be afraid if we thought that someone who had died was now alive again. What would they be like if we saw them again? When would we see them? And they would be afraid if they had just saw an angel, as any of us would. Perhaps they would be afraid that some elaborate trick had been played on them. Perhaps they were afraid that they were seeing things. Or maybe they were afraid that no one would believe them. But as the women are on their way, they are met by Jesus, the resurrected Lord himself. In verse 9, suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. They clasped his feet, implying that he had literal feet, the same scarred feet into which nails had been driven. And already in a prone position, clasping his feet, it says that the women worshipped him. And Jesus did not tell them to stop. He accepted their worship. Whereas in the Bible, where anyone bows down to an angel, the angel always says something like, "Don't bow down to me," as if to say, "I'm not God." But Jesus didn't say any such thing, because he is a divine being, and divine beings deserve our worship, and no created thing is divine, not something that is just human and is not divine. But Jesus is both, and so he can be worshipped. And he has existed since before the beginning. He has since that time taken on mortal flesh, but now he had a resurrection body, which in many respects was like his pre-resurrection body. But there are notable differences. And one difference is that the resurrection body is not limited by time, space, or matter. In fact, it can phase through walls. For as we see in Luke's account of this story, later on this same day, the Lord appeared to his disciples in a locked room, and he just appeared, even though the room was locked. And before the angel had rolled back the stone, Jesus had somehow made his way out of the tomb. This is definitely out of the ordinary, because things like this just don't happen. God, in this instance, has suspended the very laws of nature that he has fixed in place for this one-time event. While the Son of God was the only person to ever be raised from the dead, never to die again, with a resurrection body fit for heavenly existence, his resurrection has broad ramifications for creation, and especially for God's human creation. Scripture affirms that our resurrection bodies will be like that of Jesus, and that is part of the whole point of Jesus' resurrection. Upon Jesus' return, Philippians 3:20 and 21 says that he will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. Likewise, speaking of his return, 1 John 3:2 says, "What we will be has not yet been made known, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him." The resurrection body of Jesus is a precursor to our own resurrection body that we will one day receive. As with Jesus, ours will be a literal, bodily resurrection. Some have denied this. Too many have bought into the Platonic worldview of eternal disembodiment. And that's because Plato believed that material things were inferior, and that all material things are just shadows of these higher spiritual realities, and that the goal is to leave the body and leave a physical world for some higher plane of existence. And that is how, or that is what has given rise to the disparagement of matter in the Western world. Now, the Gnostics, of course, took this to an extreme of denying the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. They saw matter as inferior to a more tangible or intangible spiritual existence, even believing matter to have been created by an inferior God. So they concluded that if matter is evil, that God could not have come in the flesh, he could not have died on the cross, but it was all an illusion. But many Christians, without even knowing it, are heirs to Plato and the Gnostics. When you hear someone argue that the church's job is only to meet spiritual needs but not physical needs, then you may be hearing an example of Platonic dualism. When you hear someone argue in the church that that the church should not be concerned about the conservation of natural resources or pollution or the neglect of the body or the extinction of species, then you're definitely hearing an example of Platonic dualism. And if you hear someone speak in the afterlife, or speak of the afterlife in terms of escape from a prison, a bodily or earthly prison, then you're certainly hearing Platonic dualism. Platonic dualism is the notion that matter doesn't really matter all that much. But what really matters to the dualist is a nebulous, intangible afterlife that makes certain, or that makes creation obsolete and temporary to the point that it's hardly worth bothering about. But on the contrary, the resurrection of Jesus is the first stage in launching the whole new created order, but it's built upon the existing created order. When God had finished making the world, he looked at his creation and he said that it was good. Creation is good, and the human responsibility to look after it is expressed by Adam's being placed in the garden to tend it and to keep it. God did not make creation like disposable batteries or socks. He intends the redemption of physical creation. The creation was corrupted by sin, and when that happened, God did not say, oops, my bad. I should have known better than to make a physical creation. I'm going to wipe it out and start over with something immaterial. That will be better. God did not say that. God did not create matter simply to dispose of it, but sin has made the material world subject to decay. And what God intends to do about that is not to wipe out physical creation. That would be an admission of defeat. But he intends to redeem it. Romans 8:19 through 23 says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we await eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies." Just as our material bodies will experience resurrection and redemption, so will the rest of God's good creation. It will be delivered from its bondage to decay. Everything is certainly wearing out now, but it will be renewed. As Jesus mentions the renewal of all things in Matthew 19:28, Peter says in Acts 3:20 that Jesus must remain in heaven until the time comes for God to restore everything. Due to the curse of the fall, creation is subject to decay. It is wearing out, but it all gets renewed. It all gets restored. Now we might speculate as to whether our new resurrection body or the redeemed creation might be a reconstruction from the same raw materials that make up our world right now. But we don't really know for sure, but we do know that we will still be ourselves. We know that we will still be the same people we are. We will not lose our unique identities. We're still the same souls. We'll dwell in a physical, tangible environment, much like the one we're dwelling in now. Except it will be perfect and it will be incorruptible. It will no longer be decaying, just like our resurrection bodies. And our bodies aren't all that gets resurrected, but so does all of God's good creation. The afterlife is something of a return to paradise that was lost when human beings were cast out of Eden. The curses upon the earth will be reversed. Revelation 2:7 talks about the renewed access to the tree of life. And the Lord says in 21:5, "I am making everything, or making all things, new." While some things will be different, there will be a greater continuity between this age and the next than what we previously imagined. At the end of this age, Jesus appears according to John 5:28 and 29, "And all who are in the graves will hear his voice, and they will rise up. Some will rise to be condemned, but others will rise to live, depending upon how they chose to live their lives." But what about those who die before the resurrection takes place? Where are they now? Where do they go when they die? Do they go to heaven? In a sense, yes. We actually go to a place of comfort that Luke identifies as being at Abraham's side in Luke 16:22. Jesus says in John 14:2 that in his Father's house there are many rooms. And the word translated rooms refers to a temporary dwelling place, like a room at an inn. Jesus calls it paradise, and he invites a repentant criminal, to join him there in Luke 23:43. Paul refers to the place as both paradise and the third heaven, a realm beyond the sky, beyond outer space, in the third heaven, 2 Corinthians 12:2-4. And whether we are embodied in this intermediate existence is a good question, because when Paul visited there or was taken up to the third heaven, he said that he did not know whether he was in the body or out of the body, so how should we know? But we do know that when this earthly tent is destroyed, that is our body, that is when we die, that we have a heavenly home awaiting us where we will be clothed with immortality, 2 Corinthians 5:1-2. But remember that other scriptures like John 5 mentions the day of Christ's appearing, where he will call forth and those who are in the graves will come out and be raised to life. Now, what is the point of that if some people have already gone on to their permanent reward? While those who die before the Lord's appearing are rewarded in the presence of God, I would venture to say that this is not the end of their journey. But the climactic end is still ahead and is described in 1 Thessalonians 4:14-17. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Okay, but if this is all there is to it, then what about the promise of creation's deliverance from bondage to decay? What about the promise to renew all things, to restore everything, to make all things new? Well, 1 Thessalonians does not rule all that out. The passage concludes with the dead who've been raised, meeting the Lord in the air, meeting those who came back with him. Notice that when he comes, he does not come alone, but he'll bring with him those who have fallen asleep, the saints who've gone before us and gone on to paradise. Jesus will appear along with this great cloud of witnesses, and we will join him in the air. But for what purpose? To simply be whisked away to some other locale while physical creation burns out of existence? Well, that isn't what the Bible teaches. Here's what happens next. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 and 12-13. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire. The elements will melt with heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. So there you have the fulfillment of Paul's statement that creation will be liberated from its bondage to decay. All things will be made new. There will come a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. It's a recreation of the entire cosmos, and those caught up with the Lord in the clouds are not caught up there to be whisked away, but they're awaiting the renewal of all things so that they might inhabit this new heavens and new earth, which now are merged. An interesting thing about the word translated coming in 1 Thessalonians 4:15 is that it's the Greek word parousia, which denotes the arrival of a dignitary who is visiting a city. And in ancient Greek literature, whenever dignitaries came to a city or province, they did not come to escort anyone out, but citizens would go outside the city limits and they would meet them on their way in, and they would escort them in. And so when the saints meet the Lord in the air, as the word parousia denotes, It is not for him to escort them away. It's for us to escort him in. Now I know that some of you have heard that Jesus is never going to set foot on earth again when he comes. And that is an argument construed to denounce premillennialism. And just so you know, I am not a premillennialist. I do not believe in the pre-tribulation rapture or anything like that. I don't believe in the coming of a single Antichrist or in the reign of Jesus limited to 1,000 years with a restored temple and all that goes with it. But I do believe that Jesus will forever reign with his people over a new creation. It will be tangible, material, and bearing much resemblance to things that are familiar. Well, it's certainly possible to get too caught up in the secular trappings of this world, and we're often warned about this. What we don't hear emphasized enough is that we can also be too detached from this world. It's possible to just care too little about what happens on earth or to our bodies or to the health and well-being of others. God's intent for us is not to live out our days on this present earth as if we're serving a prison sentence, counting down the days until we get to go home. But no, we're to make this place more of a home for future generations so they can call it home as they await the final renewal. When we cannot change circumstances, we change our attitudes. And to pray that God's kingdom will come is to pray that his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And our job until Jesus comes is to transform whatever corner of the world we occupy to be more like heaven until God makes all things new. And those are the broader implications of the resurrection. So it's appropriate that Jesus was resurrected in the springtime, because that's when we see the renewal of so much of creation around us. Things that had gone dormant are coming back to life. The buds are coming back. The grass is coming back. Things are turning green. And his resurrection is the first stage that launches a renewed creation. And you can be a part of it. You can have the assurance of a resurrection body as you get on board with a program of bringing transformation to this world and to the lives of others.